Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Erica Jens. I'm the Assistant Director at the Southern Tier Library System. Let me just mute everyone real quick.
No, you're fine.
I'll just start over again. My name is Erica Jens. I'm the Assistant Director at the Southern Tier Library System. It's really nice to have all of you here today. This is the second workshop in the Web Accessibility Series. We're going to be talking about creating accessible documents and PDFs with Sarah McFadden from the New York State Library. For today's workshop, we ask that you all abide by the STLS Code of Conduct. I'll put a link for that in the chat for you all to review. Please note an important component of that is that you please not use AI transcription tools or note-taking bots during this session. Live captioning is available through Microsoft Teams, and you can turn that feature on by clicking More in the menu bar across your screen and navigating to the language and speech settings. And I'll give you a link in case that's a little bit challenging to find so that you can see how to do that. I'll also include a link to Sarah's slides for today if you want to follow along from your own devices. The workshop will be recorded. It's being recorded right now. A link to access that recording will be shared with you all via email and for everybody else who registered. If you have any trouble accessing, feel free to respond to that email and I'll help you out. If you'd like to register for the last workshop in the series on web accessibility for social media and multimedia content, which will happen next month, I will also put a link for that in the chat. And I will drop a link to the recording of the previous session in case you missed it. And one last note before I turn it over to Sarah, if you would please hold your questions until the end. You're welcome to drop them in the chat if you want, and I'll start collecting those for Sarah to answer. But just know that she'll take questions at the end. Thanks so much. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. And actually, when you get a chance, could you, I just don't have a share button for my slides, but in the meantime, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. First of all, thank you so much to Erica and to all of you for being here and for putting time into this discussion, into this really important work. My name is Sarah. I work in the Digital Services Unit here at the New York State Library. The Digital Services Unit works across the library, which is quite large, and we support all sorts of activities sort of centered around our online spaces, so website, LibGuides, things like that. For me personally, I also do a lot of work with creating and reviewing and publishing documents. I'll pop my slides up so I don't get too ahead of myself. But we're going to build on some things that we started talking about last time. So you should be seeing my slides now. A couple things.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to pop my camera off. Two things. I will lean into my camera, which is funny, but distracting. Also, it's so bright in my office this morning. So I'm going to turn off my camera while we do this. I'll turn it back on for questions at the end. I think the only other thing I want to say at this point is we should have plenty of time for questions. And I guess without further ado, we will start talking about accessible documents in PDFs and right, camera off. Okay, cool. All right, so this is one of my absolute favorite topics. Some of the things in here will be a little bit of review. Some of them will be a little bit of a deeper dive. We'll address all of that. We'll be focusing sort of our examples in our discussion on mostly on sort of PDF documents, things like reports or even flyers or other things like that, program handouts. The things we're going to talk about are widely applicable to all kinds of documents. So we'll start with that quick review because last time we were all together, we touched on a lot of different sort of basic concepts in accessibility, and we're going to take some of those and drill down a little further. So I just want to make sure that we do this review. So generally speaking, we have this very sort of kind of like rule of thumb acronym called the POUR acronym, or P-O-U-R. These are some concepts that you can use to check accessibility and sort of, start keeping accessibility in mind without going into the specifics of the standards, although there are times when you will want to do that and need to do that. So again, just to review, the things that make electronic documents accessible. So perceivable, that's the P in the POUR acronym. Again, just to review, you want to ensure that all things are perceivable, which translates to all users can detect content and access it and use it. Documents are operable when users can manipulate content and navigate through it. An understandable document supports users in learning the format of the document and learning where they might find the content they're looking for. And finally, robust, my favorite, it means that content works across operating systems and devices. We know that people increasingly use their phones for things. Everyone has sort of a different approach to using a personal device if they have a personal device. So this is a really important piece also. I did want to share with you the alternate title for this presentation, which is Fighting with PDFs, a Field Guide. We are going to talk about the PDF process quite a bit. This is admittedly kind of a difficult process when it comes to web accessibility. The other thing about this is it kind of forces me to talk about Adobe as a product. Generally, I don't think it's anyone's goal to talk up a specific product ever. But the reality of the sort of accessibility landscape is that Adobe Pro is essentially like the tool for editing PDFs, unfortunately. Hopefully that changes. But we are going to be talking a lot about, how things look in Adobe and how to sort of, frankly, this presentation is a lot about just like how to game Adobe a little bit and sort of conserve your emotional well-being. So our agenda for today, we're going to start talking about what makes a PDF accessible. And sort of a spoiler alert, what makes a PDF accessible is creating an accessible source file and exporting it from there. And we're going to go through all of this. But there's three main things that we're going to talk about. Some of these probably look a little familiar, but we're going to, like I said, drill down a little bit more. So we'll talk about headings and styles. We'll talk about data sets, which is new. That's very exciting. We all love data. And we'll talk about image descriptions. In particular, we're going to be talking about complex images, such as what you might find in an annual report or something like that. Depending on how we do on time, I do have sort of an extra PDF open on my machine that we can kind of click through and take a look under the hood, which is, frankly, how I spend a lot of my days is looking at PDFs. But the more time you spend editing PDFs and making them accessible, the easier it becomes. So, like I said, an accessible PDF starts with an accessible source file, right? So generally speaking, when you PDF something, right, that's a step that you're taking to sort of preserve the document. It's not something that can be really easily edited, things like that. So it's kind of like a final format in a way, right? So when you're creating a PDF, you have to, in order to make the PDF, you have to have something to export to PDF, which is typically a Word document. Although I will say if you're using something like Google Docs or something like that, all the same strategies apply. The tools might have slightly different names because they always do. But the concept is always the same and it always applies that you start with an accessible file in a word processor. And the reason that you do that is because essentially once you PDF or when you export to PDF, you're just going to have a much better result if you do absolutely everything you can to make your source file accessible. The name of the game is really limiting the amount of editing that you'll have to do in Adobe, limiting the amount of manual edits to the PDF itself. So we're going to, take this time to really look at what this means and what it looks like in your process. Okay, I'm just taking a breath because I'm really excited and I know that I need to slow down a little bit. So accessible source files, for our purposes today, and just generally speaking, Three main things that are really important and that I see as sort of common pitfalls when it comes to preparing documents. We're going to talk first about semantic heading structure. This should be familiar. We've talked about it before. This is my favorite topic because it's very straightforward. It seems like a very small intervention, but it's hugely helpful for readers. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. We're going to talk about regular data tables. Um, if you weren't excited about large data tables before, you absolutely will be by the end of this session, or you'll be at least as excited as me. And then, like I said, we'll talk about appropriately described complex images. And what I mean by that, complex images, things like things that you would see in a document or a report, things like graphs, charts, and even infographics, which are exceedingly popular. Okay, so headings and structure. This is about providing a document structure that shows relationships between information and also helps the user navigate. So, for example, a user who uses a screen reader to sort of recite the contents of a document, if you have a really robust heading structure in your document, they can use that to move around and find exactly what they're looking for without having to sort of read through the whole thing. Showing relationships between information is also just a really helpful way to kind of like think about this and approach it. I really like this. I'm a big outline person. So I like sort of anything that kind of helps me organize ideas under different sections and kind of chunk them out. That appeals to me as someone working in a web space, but it also really appeals to me as a reader. Okay, so when we say semantic heading styles, what we really mean is adding meaning to the heading that is not just a visual only indicator, right? So we all have made documents, we've all created documents, and it's really common, you know, if you're putting in a title or you're putting in a section header, you know, type out that title and then just kind of bold that really quickly or underline it or put it in all caps. You know, sometimes people do like a combination of all of these things. And that certainly is a good visual indicator that something is kind of happening, that a new section is starting. But the bold and italic font doesn't really have a meaning in the structure of the document, is not helpful to someone who's trying to navigate it or understand it. So the way that we sort of add this meaning is to use something called the Styles tool in Microsoft Word or your favorite equivalent. So here's where I like to pause and kind of trash talk Microsoft a little bit. The reason that I do that, let me back up a little bit, is that I just want to acknowledge that everybody in the year 2025 has really sort of highly adapted sort of strategies for using pretty mediocre tools, authoring tools. I mean, if Microsoft, if you're listening, like you need to do a little better. But in any case, I say this because the Styles tool is probably something you've been avoiding because it was something that I avoided for a really long time too. There are a lot of pretty funny jokes on the internet about how when you kind of move like one thing in a Word document, it destroys the layout of the entire document. That's real. So if you haven't used the Styles tool, that's totally understandable. And I'm not going to tell you that it's not a sometimes frustrating tool because it is, because it's a Microsoft tool. So it's a little fussy. But this is where you'll find it. So on the screen I have the top image is a screenshot of the sort of editor ribbon at the top of a Microsoft Word document. And you can see there's like sort of a drop down available there. So the second image shows you the drop down. These are the styles that are available. So you'll see in the top row there, there's a heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4. That's what we're going to be really focusing on, is applying these headings to give your document structure. If you're using like the Office 365 version of Microsoft Word, that styles tool is just going to look a little bit different. So the final image here just shows you kind of the uppercase A a little paintbrush. That's the icon for styles. All right, so here's how you would actually apply those styles. So the heading levels are really key to organizing the content and allowing people to understand how they're supposed to how different sections are supposed to relate to each other. So just a sample heading structure. You would begin with your title. You would highlight your title and then go to the styles tool and set it as a heading 1. There should only ever be one heading 1 in your document, right? Consider it like sort of the root of the document. So from there, all your major content sections would start with a heading 2. And you can have as many heading 2s as you want. After that, subsections would start with a heading 3. So one really helpful way that you can check this is with the navigation view in Microsoft Word. That will show you, essentially, it's basically an outline view, but it will show you your heading levels and actually how they are nested under each other. So that's a really great way to check that work if you're kind of just getting started. A couple things you want to avoid, like I said, we really don't want to use bold, italics, underlining, or all caps to designate headings. You really don't want to use underlining because really the only thing that should be underlined is a hyperlink. That can just be confusing. All caps also, they're still really popular, but they can be difficult for a screen reader to parse. And they can also present some challenges for sighted users as well. So again, really lean into those heading styles instead of using any of these sort of manual like typographic interventions. You don't want to skip heading levels. This is really important. If you go from a heading 1 and then all your sections start with heading 3, that will not make sense to users. And that's actually something, we're going to talk about automated checkers and things like that. Heading levels is actually something that an automated checker can reliably check for. But you have to go in order. Heading 3s have to be nested under heading 2s and so on. You can go all the way to heading, I think, 5, 6 if you want to. I rarely go past 4. If I start over nesting things, I get really confused. But your mileage may vary, and it really depends on the content that you're working with. Last tip here, you don't want to pick a style based on how it looks. So I'm just going to jump back to this slide for a second. So the styles have sort of preset appearances. They're not my favorite, so just know that you can change how they look. I do have a tip for you coming up on that, but just don't pick them based on how they look in this preview, because you can change literally every single thing about its appearance and it'll still keep its semantic meaning. But like I said, we'll come back to that. Whoops, I went backwards. Okay. Just a couple other things that I want to kind of fit in while we're at this point. So when you create a Word document that you intend to export to PDF, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. You've probably noticed this. One thing you want to make sure you do is you want to save to PDF and don't print to PDF. Print to PDF is available pretty much all the time, no matter what version of Adobe you're using. But when you print to PDF, you're just essentially creating, I guess I would describe it as like a photo of your document, really. It's literally just a flat image when you print to PDF. It won't retain any of your headings. It won't retain any alt text or anything like that. So always save as PDF, never print to PDF. Like I said, the name of the game is avoiding manual edits, but you're always going to have to make some. I don't think it's reasonable to ever expect that and anything exported or saved to PDF is good to go from the jump. At the very least, you'll want to add in some document metadata, like the title, things like that. So just be ready for manual edits. On that note, Adobe does have an accessibility checking tool. It's pretty good. Like I said, it will check if your headings are not properly nested. It will check for, it kind of checks for alt text, but not really. However, if you create a document with, let's say, like 4 different sections and they each have a section header, and you just bolded that text and then saved as PDF, you'll have tags. They won't be the right tags, and the auto checker won't be able to check that. So my message is always make use of an auto checker, but don't trust it ever for anything on its own. All of these tools need really serious human supervision. Okay, just a couple other tips about headings. 2 things that I just think are helpful to know. Using headings is a really great way to actually create a linked table of contents in your source file that you can then sort of export into your PDF. I love this. This is super helpful for me. It's a great way to create just a really functional, professional looking table of contents that will work as a linked table of contents in your PDF. So essentially, if you use headings, you can create a custom table of content that will pull information from those headings. I know I just said I was like excited to trash talk Microsoft, but that's actually a great feature. Again, if you use that, the tags for, this is getting kind of meta, but like the tags for the table of contents itself will be that much better in the PDF if you use the table of contents tool in Microsoft Word. Just a final note about using the styles tool, definitely assign your headings as you go. But as we sort of discussed before, don't worry about what they look like. Set the levels, make sure the levels are appropriate, make sure things are nested correctly. And then what you can do actually right from that styles menu is you can modify what the style looks like. I recommend doing this as a final step because you can modify the style one time and it will change it throughout your document. This is honestly great if you have a really long document. So try to ignore what the headings look like and then modify them as a final step. That's probably the most sort of frustration saving aspect of this. Okay, so we're going to talk about data sets now. So excited to talk about large tables of data. I'm just going to take a sip of water. And I just wanted to give everyone a minute because I know you're really excited about data tables too. Okay. It's really common, especially in a library sort of space, to communicate activities and value, and we rely on data to do that a lot, and we all get pretty excited about data. But data can really only be powerful if folks can use it. And some of the ways that we set up data and data visualizations, we're setting them up in ways that make it much harder for folks using assistive technology to kind of leverage that important information. So there's a few approaches here. We're going to talk about all of them. Data visualizations, sorry, because that is a hard word for me to say, like charts, graphs, infographics. Those items are going to rely on image description, alt text, which we talked about last time. For tables of data, we have a slightly different approach. We're going for something called table regularity, which will help us sort of ensure accessibility. So a little bit about tables. In a PDF or on a web page, the way that a table is coded essentially is that each individual cell in the table is tagged. When a screen reader accesses a data table in a document, it is constantly going through the process of sort of referencing the column headers and finding sort of a corresponding cell underneath the column header. So in order to make sure that a screen reader can accurately do that, you want to make sure you're not merging or splitting cells or leaving them blank, especially header cells, column header, don't leave it blank. So table regularity just means that there's the same number of cells in each row. And that's what makes it possible for assistive technology to really kind of navigate that table. Make sure that you're just putting data in your tables too. You don't want to use them for layout, really. That's maybe less of an issue than it used to be. It was really common, especially on older websites, actually, although I see it in documents a lot too, to use a table to kind of just easily create a layout, again, because Microsoft Word makes it really difficult to lay things out where you want them. But tables really should just be for tabular data. We're going to look at an example table in a little bit, and I'm just going to talk through maybe some of the hangups of that. So here's my example table, and like I'll be really honest, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to make like a sample table. I love making like sample bad charts and stuff like that. This, I think, took me longer than like anything else in the whole presentation. I don't know why. But this is a really simple table that I actually just created right in PowerPoint. It's the same tool that you use to create tables in Microsoft Word. This is a very, very simple table, but you can see the tops of the columns are bolded. Those are the column headers. And then I've just got some data, really simple fake data in the table here. This is an example of a regular table. Same number of cells in each row, no merged columns, no splits, nothing left blank. This is perfectly accessible. I'm just going to stay here for a second. It's totally possible to create a very simple table like this for a document right in Microsoft Word and to just go with this. I will say that when you do that, the tags that you'll get in the resulting PDF will need a lot of work. And it can really be a pain editing these data tables, especially if you have like really large ones. This one would probably, you would be editing just a few things, just doing a little bit of tag cleanup. So that would probably be okay. If you have a much larger data set, and I can tell you the state library publishes a lot of them, especially library development, a lot of sort of funding tables and things like that. If you have a big data set like that, my recommendation is to actually use Excel to create your source file. Excel is just, for a lot of reasons, just set up much better to kind of recognize tabular data and to export it in a better format. So my workflow for this, I will admit it is a little bit clunky, but it actually works better than it sounds. If I have a report that needs to be published that maybe has, 4 or 5 pages of narrative followed by maybe some appendices with large data tables, I do the data tables in Excel and I actually save as PDF from there. And then I use the Organize Pages tool in Adobe to kind of just slot those pages into the end of my document. That's the hardest part because the source files and the resulting PDFs that were created in Excel, they need very little cleanups in terms of the tags, which is really good. It'll save you a lot of time. It is a little fussy kind of doing, inserting pages from other PDFs and making sure that everything lines up. It's worth, I think, the extra sort of fuss. What I hope for everyone is that you just never have to spend hours kind of going through each individual cell of a table and cleaning up the tags. Of course, if you have to do that, that's much better than sending out an inaccessible table. But essentially all you need to do when you get into Excel and make your data table is make sure that you've got column headers designated, just bold them. Or you can use, there's lots of like table style presets. In Excel, you can make use of any of those. We've done it a number of times. You are just going to come out with a much better data table. The other thing I want to say, this is just a kind of an inside tip. I don't think this is like an official accessibility rule. If you're making a table with a lot of data in it, it pays to spend some time thinking about the format of that data and making sure it's like pretty consistent and pretty uniform. I'm very strict about this, which I mean probably explains a lot. But generally speaking, like for tabular data, I would not put in, sometimes you see like bulleted lists in the cells of a table or like multiple paragraphs. To me, that's falling a little more into like a layout function. So just something to kind of keep in mind and to think about. As we get into our next section here, you'll notice there's actually kind of a lot of overlap between like image description and tabular data. It's honestly kind of dizzying in some ways. But there are a couple sort of strategies here that we can make use of, especially when it comes to data tables. Okay, just gonna take another sip of water. This is kind of moving into the second to last section here. Sorry, I have a really loud water bottle. So we're going to talk about image descriptions, which we have discussed previously, but we're going to focus in on complex images like charts and graphs. So here's just, I'm just going to climb up on like my fourth soapbox here. I'm just stacking soapboxes, but sorry, I actually like lost my train of thought for my soapbox. Well, we're going to talk about charts, graphs. I got it. I remembered it. You often hear people use charts and tables used kind of interchangeably. That's really common. It's totally not a big deal, except for me, I guess. I do think it's worth really zeroing in on the correct terminology when we're talking about data sets and like visualizing data. Charts and graphs are, visual representations of data. A table is not. It is a table of data. So that will probably be a little more helpful as we move into this. Okay. So just a reminder, or a few reminders about alt text. We specifically looked at, I think, photographs last time. So we're going to focus in on some different things today. But all of these strategies still apply. These concepts remain constant. You always want to provide meaningful alt text that represents the content of the image and the intent behind it, so why you included it. What you definitely don't want to do is kind of just like check a box with alt text. So let's say you had a pie chart and your alt text that you wrote for it was pie chart of XYZ. Not appropriate, not meaningful, not helpful. And I will say like people do notice that. Users do notice when the alt text is kind of an afterthought. So I would say that's something you really truly want to avoid. We know that the same image can have very different alt text in two different documents or contexts. This is honestly a little bit easier with charts and graphs because they are, usually it's something that you create to express, data or information that you want to share. So it's a little easier to kind of tease out exactly what you want to say. Same things apply with, if you have a document where maybe your logo appears on every page or you have sort of decorative horizontal lines. There are a lot of times when you want to actually mark those as decorative, which essentially hides them from a screen reader. So there's a couple different thoughts about this. Some people come down more on the side of, everyone should have access to all elements of a document, including the decorative elements. But there's also a case to be made for marking things decorative when they're going to be sort of distracting or if they take clarity away from the document. So I always say, like my example is always like, a document that has like your library's logo in the corner of every page. That's a nice touch, but you maybe don't need it read out at the bottom of every page, especially if it's going to interrupt the flow of something else. So it's definitely something that you need to kind of use your judgment on. And it's always going to depend, again, on your content, but it may depend on your audience as well. And again, just a good reminder, don't trust the automated checker, especially with alt text. It absolutely cannot do this. When you're working in Microsoft, any Microsoft tool, and you add in, clip art or any kind of image, the AI will attempt to describe it. It's awful. Please don't leave that in there. Make sure you add to it. Make sure you correct it. The other thing is like the automated alt text in Microsoft says that it's AI generated, so you definitely want to update that. You don't want end users encountering that and knowing that that effort was not made to include them. So here's some complex images that alt text is absolutely required for. Some of these honestly might be a little bit surprising. So diagrams, maps, charts and graphs we talked about, and infographics as well, which are definitely really popular in library spaces, and can be very, very complex images that sort of, unfurl a whole story. But there are still strategies for describing them, and actually have a great resource for you at the end um, with some really good examples of actually essentially writing a transcript for an infographic, which is what it comes down to. Okay. So again, you want to make sure that you're describing the main ideas. So if you included a pie chart about your library's activities, what were you trying to show? Were you trying to show that 50% of programs were computer programs? Like, what is the main idea? That's absolutely where you want to start with your alt text, although you can include other relevant information. For complex images, there's a strategy that's called long descriptions. So your short description, your alt text, your immediate sort of in the moment response, that alt text says, this is a graph showing this, but you might also then, if you have a lot more to say about it, if it's very complex data, you might link out to something called a long description, which actually goes into much more detail about what's going on with the data. And like I said, I'll show you toward the end a really good website. It's actually a really old website, but it has a ton of really good examples of actually very STEM heavy sort of data representations and some language for describing them and some different strategies. One of those strategies, interestingly, is providing a data table. So this is where I think it's important for everyone. I mean, I feel this way for myself. I think it's important to kind of pause here and really think about like why we're sharing certain data in specific ways. Obviously, a data visualization is like a visual centric approach that's like tailored for a cited experience. That can still exist, but it's really important to understand the other ways that folks who might not be cited are going to access that data and not just access it, but they're probably going to want to do something with it. So data tables, anytime you can get anything in like a text, essentially like a text format, that's your most flexible format. All right, just some other image considerations that are really important, especially for when you're creating your own charts and graphs, which Microsoft, it does make it very easy to do that. You can make some really cool things. So color contrast, my advice to you is to always use a contrast checker just to make sure that, any kind of labels or color schemes that you have in your chart just meet that sort of minimum compliance for contrast. I don't think there's a way to, essentially, these contrasts are measured in very specific ratios, which that doesn't make any sense to me, which is why I use a contrast checker. But you just want to make sure, especially for, maybe smaller things like labels and things like that, just that you're making it easy for folks to differentiate. Color dependency is really important too. You always want to use labels, easy to read, hopefully large enough, hopefully with enough color contrast. You want to put those on all your charts and graphs so that you're not relying on color as the only indicator of meaning. So again, a pie chart is a really good example. You might have a pie chart with 5 different size segments and each one is a different color. Usually there's like a key underneath that says, oh, orange means computer programs. For folks that don't see color, that's not helpful. So putting labels right on the graph to make sure that that information is available to everyone, that's always a good move. You can also use, if you're doing like a bar chart or something like that, honestly, we could talk about different kinds of graphs for so long. If you're using a bar chart or another kind of like crowded sort of element, you can also use, instead of using colors, you can use like patterns on the different bars so that folks can still sort of differentiate, but they don't need to necessarily see color. So there's lots of different approaches there, but labels are your best bet, in my opinion. Okay, let's look at some PDF tags for funsies. I have a sample Word document here. This is just copy that I took right off of a state education website. This is a document that's about the state education department. So that's the heading 1, that's the title. As you can see, that's the only one on here. We never come back to heading 1 after the title. This is part of a longer document, but the first section has to do with main branches of SED, so that gets a heading 2. Each section underneath is talking about one of these main branches, so those are all heading 3s. So I just wanted to show you, I know that this is hard to see, and I might be able to share another one a little bit later, but this is that same document once it's been PDF'd and it's in Adobe. The panel, kind of gray panel, speaking of color contrast, over on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the tags panel in PDF in Adobe. I'm getting too excited. You can see, again, I'm sorry that they're small, but you can see there's an H1 tag is the very first tag in here, followed by 2 paragraph tags, 1, 2, and then you can see an H2 for the main branches heading, and you can see the H3s as well. So when you use the styles tool, this is what you will get in your tags when you get into the PDF. It will retain that structure in the tags, which is great. So if something happens and there is like a little mishap with maybe headings being out of order or mislabeled, you can make edits right here. You can right click on the tags right in the tag panel to edit them. But that's a lot more time consuming in my opinion than just creating the accessible source file. So if we did this source file and instead of using the semantic heading styles, I had just bolded these, your tags would look more like this. So every single tag in here is just a paragraph tag. There's no sense of structure. There are no sort of labels on anything. And one thing I will say that's probably happening is a lot of these little paragraph tags are actually probably tags of white space, which is very annoying. But that's part of what can happen when you don't use heading styles. Okay, so I know that my main thesis around this was that you want to do as much as you can not to do manual PDF edits, but you're pretty much going to need to at least review that document, check on it, potentially do a little bit of cleanup. It's well worth the time to do it. The other thing that I just want to say is in my work, I see, and this is not me trying to sort of pin particular blame on anyone, although I will say like vendors in particular create, you know, beautiful, complex PDFs, like very high quality deliverables, but they're not accessible PDFs, and they never were sort of thought through that way. Once you have something like that in a PDF, it's really, really difficult to remediate it and to make it fully accessible. So if you are working with a vendor on something, just make sure they know that they need to do things accessibly. Sometimes they're not quite as motivated. Okay, just some benefits of accessible documents generally, especially if you are hosting them on your website. Things like headings and heading structure, is it such a good boost to, I mean, I kind of hate saying SEO, like search engine optimization, but honestly, It's a great way to boost findability of materials on your website. I can tell you just from my experience, I'm very heavy-handed with headings. I love heading structure. And I've noticed a real change in our search results now when I, search just our web page or just do a general Google search. If you use headings, that's a great way to come up in searches a lot more. A lot of the things that we publish here at the library, well, actually anything that we publish here at the library gets cataloged and goes into our digital collections as an official state document. This has actually been a really helpful piece of the puzzle for me when it comes to thinking about, okay, well, actually what makes a document complete? Like what makes it like take on its final form, and what is helpful for someone who is cataloging that as an official state document? Again, like that might not be everybody's experience, but I think that's a really helpful way to think through all the requirements for a document, what makes it, the best possible document that someone can then sort of take action on, which I think is generally like, the end goal. So again, we're always aiming for like the most complete digital object that will be as helpful as possible to our present and future selves. Okay, so as promised, I have some links for you here. Some of them might be a little familiar. I tend to kind of bring them with me everywhere I go. How People with Disabilities Use the Web is a really fantastic resource. There are articles, there are videos. It is well worth the time to spend just to sit with information about the different strategies that folks use to access documents, to access images, to use data, find data and use it. Getting Started with Accessibility from UNC Greensboro. In particular, I think they have a really great approach to documents and to kind of like breaking down what your responsibilities are. If you want something that's a little more fully featured, CUNY's Accessibility Toolkit for Open Educational Resources has a ton of information and a lot of really good examples and even additional resources. I wanted to share some image description resources specific to talking about complex images, because I think that's something that is honestly pretty difficult to do, something that I try to practice a lot. So GBH and NCAM, they strangely have two websites. So there's the current one, which is linked up here first. That has some free sort of training webinars that you can kind of follow along to learn more about how to do this kind of complex image description. I actually kind of prefer their old site, and when I say old site, it has like a super 90s vibe that I found very soothing. This site, though, has a lot more examples of how to talk about, very data-heavy charts and graphs and things like that. I found it really helpful. I hope you do too. And then just to bring it home, I just want to remind you, we are writing about accessibility on the New York State Library blog. We publish an accessibility tip every month. So that's a great place to go if you just need a quick refresher on something or you're hoping to connect really quickly to a resource. Also, our blog is really fun. We have folks from across the library writing for it, writing about their work. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And then I wouldn't leave you without a tiny Shia LaBeouf, so we will end on that. If you have questions, I am super here for it. And again, I thank you for putting up with my antics. So let's get to your questions.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. Folks, feel free to turn on your microphones or use the chat if you have questions. Sarah, we do have one that just came in the chat, and I can read it for you so everyone can hear.
Okay,
What
yeah.
is the tipping point to go from short description to long description alt text?
That is a great question. My gut feeling is that it's always sort of dependent on your like specific situation, but generally a short description is like around 150 characters. I don't really like play exactly by those rules, to be really honest with you. It very much depends on kind of what we're working on. But that is one rule of thumb that you can use. Like if it's more than 150 characters, I think, is it characters or words? I can look that up. But you know, again, it's kind of it kind of just depends on what you're working with and what your capabilities are, in terms of like what can you link to for that long description. So it's, again, make sure you're planning this really far in advance.
Sarah. Laura has her hand up. Laura, if you want to.
Sorry, I just threw it in the chat. I was looking for which resource in that list talked about alt text for infographics. We use a lot of
Yes.
infographics. Everybody loves them.
Yes. Yes. Let me pop that open on my other screen here. For infographics, I believe, I believe it's the CUNY toolkit. If you follow through, if you go to the image description section, they talk about that there. Feel free to reach out though if you don't find that. I do remember very specifically looking at it. I don't think I dreamed it, so if you don't find it, just let me know. But yeah, great question,
We have
because those are hard.
Thank you.
got a comment in the chat. If you do a deep dive into making your documents accessible, here is a great podcast to listen to, and the link is provided. So check that out if you're interested.
Thank
And we have a
you.
question from Joe. Is there a way to convert old non-compliant PDFs without recreating them from scratch?
Yes, there is. You're not going to have a good time, and you might sort of only be able to kind of get so far. It really kind of depends what's in the PDF. I did say you can do some tag editing in Adobe, but you can also have it tag a document for you. So if it's never been tagged before, you can have it do the auto tagging. It's okay. You'll still have to do a lot of manual tagging. So it's difficult. There is no really like conversion process other than kind of going in there and fixing them. So you actually might want to recreate them from scratch. That might actually be a faster solution. I have definitely had that experience before.
Going back to the 150 characters debate, someone said 150 characters is approximately 25 words. Does that sound correct for short description?
It does. I'm pretty wordy. I tend to I tend to say a lot in my alt text. Let me just check really quickly because I remember seeing this too.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, there's no specific benchmark. But yeah, okay, 125 characters. What did I say? 150. That's pretty good. But I never limit myself. I love alt text. I love the opportunity to get some extra information and sort of expression in there. So I wouldn't say that you need to treat it like old Twitter or anything like that. Like don't cut yourself off, but keep that in mind.
Question. How important is it to set up the metadata for each file you create?
That's a great question. It's important. It's really helpful. Again, it's great for that findability piece. But also, one thing that we always do with our metadata for our PDFs is we always make sure there's a very descriptive title for the document, and we make sure that the title is what is read out to folks and not the file name. That's just that's a small thing, but it's really helpful for someone that's trying to make use of your document. Plus, it's fun to add keywords. Like, we're all library folks here. Like, we love that.
Jenny asks, do you know if annual reports downloaded from Baker and Taylor are accessible?
They're not. They're not. They're not, they're not accessible up to the level that we just talked about. So, if I had to guess, I would say probably not a super robust heading structure. I might be wrong. There could be just weird things where like, spaces are getting tagged, things like that. So they probably just need a lot of cleanup. They're probably not the worst. I would say they are at least exporting them correctly based on what I've seen. they're not like a flat image file, which is really good. I can probably look more into that if that's helpful, but that's my best guess.
Thanks, Sarah. I guess I wonder if you wouldn't mind looking into that. Some libraries will post that as their annual report to the community, so it might be helpful for them to know
Yeah,
what.
absolutely. I'll check into that and I will let you know if that's okay, if that works okay for you.
That
I
sounds
can just
great.
let you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The next question, Bethany acknowledges this might be too involved for right now, but how do you go about editing tags in Adobe? What do they look like and what are you actually changing? I didn't know these existed before today.
Okay. So first, welcome to the PDF tag life. Erica, if it's okay with you, I actually opened up a PDF earlier in case we wanted to do this, so I can just show you all really quickly. See if I
Sounds
can
great.
find it. See if I can find it somewhere here. Here it is. Okay. So this is actually a document we have on our intranet that we created specifically for this purpose. So I'm over here on the left in the tags panel. Okay, so one thing is that you can kind of open them up like this to see what the content actually is. But basically, there's two parts to the tag. There's the label, so this is the H1, the heading. And you can see over here, the view over here is showing us what that corresponds to. And then the little sort of information with like a little cardboard box next to it, that's just sort of the content that's within that label. So you can right click on any of these to edit them, or actually you can just click on them to edit them and just highlight it. So this is a paragraph. I wouldn't really tag it as something else, but just for the sake of demonstration, I can just type H3 and hit enter. Now this is a heading 3 tag. And actually, if I do a quick accessibility check, that should get flagged. Headings, yep, appropriate nesting, failed. It'll show you where. So then I would just make that back into a paragraph. I'll just show you one other thing really quickly, or two other things. We didn't really talk about lists. Those are also sort of tagged in a very specific, heavily nested way. So when you're doing bulleted lists, don't create them from scratch. Always use a list tool. And then I do want to show you a table really quickly. Oh, I should have used this sample table. It's way better. So the way that tables are tagged is there's the table itself, and then each row is tagged, and then within each row is each cell. And you can see actually something kind of funky happened here where we have this like random kind of empty, this is a bug in Adobe if you see this path thing. So we could actually just delete that by right-clicking on it. So that's pretty much what it looks like to edit tags. You can drag them around and put them in different order. That can be fun and also can ruin your day. So you do have some flexibility here. I hope that was helpful and I hope it didn't make it worse. There are a lot of really good, in the resources I shared, there's a lot of really great PDF information. We work on PDFs so often at the State Library that I'm basically reading that information all the time. So.
Thanks for doing that quick demo.
Yeah, of course.
We have one final question I think we can get to, hopefully, from Dusty. This could be a giant can of worms. What about when we are making flyers in Canva for programs? If we post them to our websites, then they need to have this information. Any thoughts on how to go about this?
Yeah, great question, by the way. Thank you for bringing this up because this is something that we're sort of working through as well. Canva is so popular. It's such a great tool for all of us, honestly. They have some sort of accessibility checks built in. But one thing that I'm experiencing is sort of when they get exported, when they get saved to PDF, there are just some strange things going on with the tags, specifically the tags kind of being out of order. And it can be really difficult to kind of set that document structure in Canva. It's not out of the question. It's just going to take probably some more manual edits in the PDF. But that would I would say that's probably the approach that you want to take.
Great. That was a better, more optimistic answer than I was worried.
We love
But that was great.
Canva. I mean, it's hard because like I think they're a little bit like they're kind of catching up right now to the reality, which is that like this needs to be accessible. But it is a great tool, and I do think that it's usable. Just prepare yourself to spend some time in the PDF.
Well, that puts us right to 11 o'clock. Thank you all so much. And Sarah, thank you. This was a great presentation, very helpful. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Thanks for having me, and thanks for taking the time to hang out this week.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you in November for the next one.
Okay, can't believe that it's going to be November, but that sounds great.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.